Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are, everybody. Hi, welcome to our Code Presents webinar. Today is going to be our best practices for optimizing Power BI and DAX modeling. We're going to be joined today by our presenters, Helen and Andy Clark, and we're looking forward to some information, some awesome information about best practices for Power BI. My name is Jim Duffy. I'm the guy kicking everything off here. I'm in charge of business development, marketing, sales, all that fun stuff here at Code. I'm a former developer, and I've been drawn to the dark side, and now I do a bunch of marketing and stuff like that. My email address is there. If you have any questions about what we do, I'll be happy to answer them for you. A little bit about Code. Our primary mission is just helping people build better software via custom software development. We can do web, cloud, mobile, desktop. All the different platforms are very typical. We also do a bunch of user interface and design work. We come in with project rescue, help people get the projects back on track again. We do a lot of legacy application modernization, FoxPro, VB6, Access, all that type of stuff. So we'd be happy to help you with that. We're a certified partner, so if you need any help, please let us know. Your ticket to free consulting here is we provide you with an hour of free code, which may seem kind of strange. It's an hour on us. No strings, no commitment, no credit card, just help from our experienced development team. So if you've got questions, maybe you're stuck on an issue, you need some help, just reach out to me and let me know. Slots are limited, so let me know if we can get you scheduled for a free hour of code. We are looking for developers. We are hiring at the moment. Come join the Code Consulting team. We've got openings for senior C# developer, .NET desktop developer. The whole list is here. The details are there in that bit.ly. You can also go out to our jobs page, which I'll have that slide coming up here in just a moment. Some more reference links here. There's our jobs page right there because we are looking for developers right now. If you'd like to write for Code Magazine, there's a link to our Code Magazine page, as well as we can help add resources to your development team if you are needing, we just need 3 or 4 devs to add to the team. We can definitely help with that as well. So just let us know. You'll find us on a number of the social networks. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on Twitter. You can like us on Facebook. That would be awesome. Code Magazine is the leading software developer magazine written by expert developers for you, developers. We are probably the last magazine standing from the developer platform that still publishes a print copy. And as a member or as a registered attendee of this event, you'll also get a free digital subscription to Code Magazine. You don't need to do anything. It'll just happen automatically. You'll get an email saying, hey, you've got a subscription for everyone who doesn't already have one. If you'd like to share this offer with friends on social media and anywhere else you want, if you've got developers who you think would benefit from having a free subscription to Code Magazine, here's a bit.ly link for you to share with them. We'd appreciate you spreading the word. Our Code mobile app, this is the best way to check out code on the road. If you're on the go, the Code mobile app is the best way to get to do that. And we look forward to having you download and start using the Code mobile app. Here's the kicker. There's $100 in this for you, possibly. We have a very short survey. I'll have 12 questions. Fill that out, and it's got to be done by Friday midnight this week on the 11th. Fill that out, and you're eligible to win a $100 Amazon e-card. All the registered attendees for this are the list of the people I will be selecting from to that one random drawing to win a $100 Amazon e-card. So fill out the survey. Good luck. Just want to throw a word on here about Photino. Photino is a cross-platform tool that allows you to build native cross-platform desktop apps that are lighter than light. That's a marketing phrase. It's an open source framework for building native cross-platform desktop apps that use web UI technology. So it's kind of like Photino. It's kind of like Electron, but a whole lot lighter. It's maintained by our Code Magazine team with the help of the open source community, so we're very active in it. Give it a look. Try photino.io, and there's the GitHub address for the repository as well. If you're interested in prior recordings of our earlier webinars, you can find those at codemag.com/stateof.net or codemag.com/codepresents, which is this series is a Code Presents webinar. You'll also be seeing an email. Every registered attendee will be seeing an email with the link to all the slides and recording and everything else. So about our presenters today, Helen Wall's a LinkedIn instructor. She's a Power BI expert, and Andy Clark is a BI project manager and her colleague. And I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say about Power BI. And so with that, I will pass it over to Helen and Andy, and you guys are on your way. Thanks.
Okay, hello everybody. Andy Clark here. Helen, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm excited to talk about Power BI.
Good. All right. So where are you going to start? Well, I can see where you're going to start, but and I think there's some fascinating data here, and I know you've done some great work there. So ERCOT is a great data source for people to go and practice some skills.
Yeah, this actually comes from the EIA. So it's a free public data set. And in this case, I connected to various energy sources. And so it was something that's, I think it's really helpful to use public data because there's a lot out there and you may as well tap into it. So, and this was actually something that I got into after the winter storms about a year ago. So it was something that was talked about a lot at the time. And so I think there's a lot of, it's like COVID data or, when the census came out, you sort of see, there's a certain trend and interest in different data. And so keeping up with that and trying it out, I think is a fun way to learn about Power BI.
Yeah, and of course there are so many sources out there, aren't there, of this data, which is real, it's meaningful. You and I both live in Houston, Texas, and everybody can appreciate that from of course, my strong Texas accent. But this data is, we went through these winter storms, and the data is meaningful to go and see what happened. And there are so many other sources out there for anybody looking to try some BI skills to work with something very real and something very meaningful.
Yeah, and that actually kind of leads into one of the big things that I learned when I first started working with Power BI was to take a small piece of the data. I think that there's a tendency to kind of look at something. I think you and I've probably learned the hard way about a lot of this, is that rather than saying, let's figure out everything that's going on and like let's look at everything, is really we want to look at the small piece of the model, and because there are there's a number of connection types we can use in Power BI, and we can typically want to use import. That's the recommended approach because it allows us to cache the data within Power BI, and so it's easier. It's going to be faster to do the calculations and render the visuals. But with a massive data set, so if we use all of that blue area, then we don't necessarily need all of that. And so I think a lot of it is kind of picking the piece that we should work with and figure out what's going on there. Because data is hard to work with, and there's a lot of areas where you have to match it up, and it may not necessarily go that way initially. And I think that also not just the data itself, but what are people trying to do with it? In the sense that if we starting out with something really big, and it is a group endeavor in so many ways, because there's not one person that has, the entire market on everything that's going on with the data. I don't have a DBA background, and so I definitely kind of the ultimate consumer of data, so to speak. And so looking at that small piece of the data and going to the business and saying, well, what do you want to do with this? And what's your end goal? Like there's always going to be something that they want to optimize, or what decisions are they trying to make? Because ultimately there are decisions that want to be made, and it's not just about creating charts or creating calculations, but how is this going to help them not be up at night all the time, or be able to make decisions without having like everyone there. And it's much more where it's much more visible as to what's going on. And so it's kind of a challenge, and that's why the smaller, start with a certain region, start with a certain business, and figure out what's going on there, and work with the business in that aspect, and then you might kind of add another square in that. So there's a lot of data out there, and we only tap into a small part of it, and it's in different data sources.
Yeah, well, and I think that's a really important approach for anybody looking at data. I mean, if I give you an example, we work with Microsoft Dynamics applications an awful lot, and if you think they've got several thousand, 7,000 tables in total, we probably get 80% of what we do from around 50. So that yellow square there, to help people focus, I think is really important. And don't try and take on too much at once, because data is mentally tough.
Yeah. Yeah, it definitely is. And I think that's something that I learned kind of firsthand. And so you recognize this. This is actually your diagram, and this is fantastic. Kind of puts the data on the Dunning-Kruger curve. So, and I think this is recognizable to a lot of people, because kind of before you can really run with data, sometimes you might get a data set to work with. I mean, I've definitely had this approach with Power BI, where someone says, well, we can't give you access to the data set yet, but here's an existing data, like here's a CSV file or an Excel file that we can use as a starting point. And so, sometimes it starts with that data set, but then ultimately you want to kind of grow it out, right? So you're starting, you look at this starting point is where you look at, you're starting the new project and you have this Excel file, the data matches, and you think, this is great, this is going to go, everything's going to go smoothly. But there is that, like, the ups and downs to it. And, it's figuring out the filters that go on it. And there's often different, numbers and the ways things are calculated. And no one person knows it. And so that's kind of where, when you realize it's you're not getting much done, and you're sitting there, looking at it, and you think, well, let me see, at some point in this, I would say I would talk to someone in IT or someone in accounting, because like SQL queries, when you write SQL queries, right, it's not necessarily like hard to write the code itself, but it's a lot of that figuring out what tables go in it. And that's really the hard part, is keeping that straight. So that's why when I find a query that works, I save it on, save it somewhere secure, or I email it to people saying, this is the one that works. And that kind of gives, that's a benchmark to run with. And that's how kind of sometimes version control gets a little mad, even if you use a version control, application like GitHub or something.
Yeah, I mean, I find it really important to take whatever I'm working on and make it manageable. If we're taking, I mentioned Dynamics, and the account object, or entity as they call it, has got, I don't know, several hundred, say 300 for the sake of example, fields, as you get it out of the box. And, you probably need 20 of those. And when you're trying to work with data, and you've got this across multiple tables, and you've got GUIDs and things like that, which are in themselves, when you've got a big list of these things, difficult for the brain to go and focus. So taking a mass of data and making it manageable, I think for me is always the first job when going through a new data set. And I did that. I wrote this deliberately. I had no idea about Dunning-Kruger at all, but I wrote this deliberately because my head was banging. I think I slept and woke up the next day and just carried on going and felt better about it. So but I think just making what you're working on manageable is important, but also I think going into these situations when you're taking on new data set and lots of data, and realizing there's going to be there's going to be lots of things you don't understand, there's going to be lots of things that you figure out, and when you initially start working with it, it's gonna feel like overload for a little while, but if you just work through, I think you'll get there.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that is this inspired me to do something, to create something similar. And what I found was, like, specifically for SQL queries, kind of the lowest point is when you get kicked out or cut off access because you've been trying things out and it hasn't worked. So you just keep, saying, okay, I'll try the query again and see what works. And that's where the smaller data set can be helpful, because you're less likely to get in trouble for running a small query as opposed to a big query. And that's really all you kind of need to start with, is thinking, okay, how am I going to, how am I going to get all of this organized? And it's not, I mean, I think that a lot of data cleaning ends up spending, everyone wants to jump in and do kind of the cool stuff, the visuals, and the front, what it looks like on the, when you walk in the front door. And there's so much more work that goes behind the scenes and just getting everything, set up. And I always kind of liken it to this, it's like IKEA, when you go in and you buy a flat pack of furniture, and, all the measurements in theory, right, by the time someone in the business gets it, all the measurements, right, you've checked the data and made sure the numbers are correct, and then they match and all the pieces fit together. And that's a lot of the work behind the scenes. And it's kind of, a lot of times, it ends up being like 80% of the work is cleaning data. Because there's going to be a weird, address space, it's going to be an odd address or something like, entered incorrect, especially with CRM data, as I'm sure you know firsthand.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I mean, I think, and I can probably take it. I mean, I have a 90-10 rule of thumb when working with Power BI, on the basis that 90% is the stuff behind the scenes and 10% is the visualizations that everybody sees. And I think if you work on that basis, and I think you make a great point about cleaning data, and all the other things that come along with this, like your measures and calculations, blah blah blah. And I think when you go into this, there's not much glamorous about working with data. There's a lot of sleuthing that goes on to try and figure out what's going on with the data. And the point you made there, Helen, about the one piece of data that's messing everything up for whatever reason. And it just takes, I am looking right now at a big 32-inch 4K screen, which I live with on the basis of that's what I need to go and do my job, to go and look at lots of data and figure out what's going on. And sometimes I can spend hours doing exactly that. So if anybody comes into BI thinking it's all about pretty visuals, then that's the small part at the end.
Yeah, and there's so much behind the scenes, like even the, what I showed as the first example with, the ERCOT data, that was actually kind of a lot of layers that go into that. And in that there are two tabs in there, right? Because there's always a request to see more on one screen. And, kind of a lot of it is thinking about what people want to do with that, what they're hoping to do at the end of it. And there's so many pieces that you don't see, right? If it looks easy, it was hard to create. It's sort of like the UI, right? In the sense that mainframes are much easier to program, much easier to work with on the backend. But then it's the UI that gets people interested in computers rather than a green screen. But that's a lot more work for the developers and those putting them together. So in a way, it is a lot like that, kind of the green screen versus the the modern UI like we're looking on right now.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah.
So one of this is actually something that I'm recording Power BI Weekly for LinkedIn Learning. And one of the things that I found really interesting was this integration with data science, because I think a lot of people look at data science and they think it's kind of like it's a glamorous role, right? In the same way, these visuals and things that look good on the surface. But there's a lot of kind of work that goes on behind the scenes. And so this is an example of a data query, and this is specifically for Python. So this is something that is actually kind of neat, in that we take the existing Power BI data, it's the data table in this example, and this is actually a 5-record database just for the example, and being able to kind of take that data and run it in a Python query and have that returned into into the data queries themselves in the Power Query editor, and then we can use them for different modeling. So I think that this is something, you know, the data science is, I think there's a lot of integration that's going to you know, occur with that. And so this is an example of logistic regression model that I did in Python. And so there's not, I didn't create, it's kind of that S sigmoid curve for the predicted outcomes. And so it's interesting what integrations are. And so I think it's going to be exciting to see the additional, you know, functionalities like this in the future, because it allows us to you know, use these existing steps and then also write our own code.
So Helen, I mean, you know, you're posting an awful lot on this subject on LinkedIn, or Power BI, and where data science meets Power BI, or BI in general. And look, and everybody that's part of this, I mean, follow Helen Wall on LinkedIn. Great daily posts. But I'm fascinated how these are being received at the moment, whereby we've got this intersection of Power BI and data science, and you know, how much interest you're seeing out there about these two together.
You know, it's interesting. There's one of the, so I recorded a Power BI course last year, and this is available in LinkedIn Learning, where I talked about this integration with AI machine learning. And it's a big space, right? There's people that go to school to learn like one, you know, just a few algorithms or a few models. And one of the things that's interesting is these, like, there's kind of three levels with it, and that there's this AI that we already see, where you know, for example, if you connect to a data source like an Excel file in Power BI, it will often guess at what steps come next. Right? So it'll promote the headers. It will change the data type based on, it makes a prediction based on the first 1,000 rows. To say, well, we think this is going to be, you know, a date data type, or it looks like the first row is in the header. So it's those built-in AI functionalities. And then there's also the Azure Cognitive Services. For example, there's Azure Machine Learning, and a lot of I think the big things that people, I think there's a tendency to even logistic regression to look at this, you know, kind of this grand scheme and idea. But a lot of it is like low-hanging fruit. And one example of this is there's an algorithm, like the fuzzy matching, which isn't something that you would think, okay, well, what does that do? But it actually fixes spelling issues. And I think that's a really big thing, is those low-hanging fruit, and that
Yeah, we have lost Helen. Okay, we wait and see if she comes back. Oh, there you go. Okay, so while we're waiting, I've got a question here from Todd Rederberg. What is a good way to document data sets and data models? You know, documentation of all the work we do, I think, is really, really important. And you know, the point you made there about colleagues being able to follow in is something that I think you absolutely need to think about. And I think it happens at a number of levels. I think documentation of what you're trying to achieve with Power BI is important in terms of definitions. And you know what I mean by that is, okay, take you know, gross to net calculations. We do all kinds of things like this with financial analysis, but you know, exactly what is that comprised of? What does it mean? And making sure that when you're doing gross to net, for example, what's included, what's not included. So you know, just general OneNote documentation, Word documentation, Evernote documentation is really useful. And I think the other level, and what I'm very conscious that I try and do when working with Power BI, is just put lots of comments in my DAX and make sure that, you know, there's lots of things in there to explain exactly what I'm doing. I find it comes in quite useful for myself on a regular basis, and that's on the basis that I've not looked at something for a couple of years. And I think we all know what it's like when you're in that situation and you're trying to figure out what on earth you did a couple of years ago. So having those comments there as well really helps. But documentation is a fascinating area because it's one of those things like testing and training that we never do enough of, and we all look back and think, wish I documented more. But there are two ways. But what I think the first thing to do is just to get into the habits of doing it is important. And I'm just looking to see if Helen is coming back, or if there's any more questions. Hello, I think this is it. Helen, you there? Okay,
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah,
okay.
You're almost there. I was just going to deal with the next question, but I'll leave you to carry on going.
Actually, I think that you answered that way better than I could in terms of the documentation and how to keep track of that. So it was in a way well timed.
I spent a lot of time doing it.
Yeah, I think sometimes you learn the hard way. There's that that element of thinking about what you would like yourself to know in the future.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
That's actually the great thing about that's the great thing about Power Query, which is also available in Excel, is being able to record your steps and say, okay, I know I got it from this data source, and then I try to make all the changes in the Power Query editor so I know what I did.
Yeah. All right. So, I mean, just leaving off, and you kind of you're in full flow on the Python and everything work you were doing. I mean, I just got to follow up from. Oh yeah. I mean, so for anybody looking to do something similar, again, what a great places to go and find some data sources. So, for example, you could do, some ALS algorithms or something like that.
Yeah, I would say, and so specifically, where there's a lot of actually areas where you can run the algorithms. So you can set it up kind of in the, and I think it just depends on how you're using it, because if it's something that's going to apply to a wider audience, then you start to think about, well, is this something that it takes more time to build, like in a database or in a a cloud service, than it does like me on my own computer. But if it's something more people will use, it is that kind of the low-hanging fruit versus how are we going to scale it out? And I think there's a lot of discussion, right? So R, for example, right, is Python's often used for like kind of like wider scale modeling, and there's a lot of developers on this call, and I think a lot of people learn that firsthand. But R also has uses as far as it allows us to pretty quickly set up steps for models, and so I think there's a lot. It's thinking about that scalability, and that's really kind of something I think at the forefront of effectively using Power BI is thinking about how to scale things out.
Yeah, and that, I'm actually, Todd's asked another question. Actually, I'm just going to deal with this very quickly because I think it's a natural segue with it. And what are some considerations of putting logic into Power BI DAX or into a data mart or data warehouse? And and you saying, Helen, scaling things out, I think led me to think about answering this one very quickly. And I think it's about a big part of that is architectural and how much data you're dealing with and where the data is. And what we quite often like to do, if you're dealing with really big data sets and tens to hundreds of millions of rows, then try and get as much as the heavy lifting done at source. So put that logic into your data warehouse if possible, so the data comes through as clean as possible into Power BI, and you can just go and do minimal calculations. And so that means that, you also have the alternate choice, depending on how much data you're dealing with, about doing a lot of that within Power BI. And I think sometimes you do need to go and test when you're dealing with this data in terms of where is it most performant. And I think, you have to focus on a couple of things when you're doing BI work. And, the first two for me are everything's got to be accurate. The data has got to be correct and accurate. But number two, it's got to be quick and it's got to be responsive. So again, long way round to answer your question there, Todd. But, if the model is getting less responsive in Power BI because you're doing your calculations there, you think about shifting that to the back end. All right, Helen, sorry, I'm going to hand back to you with regards to joins.
Well, and that also brings us to kind of one of the challenges that a lot of that goes through is that, so if we have two big data tables, like let's say that, we have two databases we're connecting to, and we think, okay, well, this gives us all the data we need. Let's just use a many-to-many join. And sort of many-to-many joins are, it comes with a warning message for a reason. There's if you select it, so you could potentially lose data. This could be problematic. And so it's a fix for something that needs a many-to-many join, but that's also kind of where a lot of those accuracy issues can potentially come into play. Like ideally, you're going to be able to connect to a well-organized database where these tables already exist. But that's not necessarily always the case. Sometimes there is, kind of a dimension that needs to be added, especially with dates. There's a lot of, especially for time series models, is how are you modeling it at the time? Yeah. And this is, if you want to create a key so that you have holes in your pivot tables once you create a table in Power BI, and so otherwise you're going to be missing one of the labels. And that's something that's easy to hide it with a many-to-many join, but then it becomes more apparent when you do, kind of check it against something.
Yeah, many-to-many, it's a recent-ish thing that came into Power BI. Mm-hmm. It wasn't there originally. It was added in. I think that when you're new to this, it's easy to use many-to-many to make things work. And I look back at one of my first models recently, and I was horrified at myself. It was full of many-to-many, which I definitely don't do now, and I generally don't do at all. I'll find another way to manage the modeling, not to do many-to-many. But it's one of those things that affects the integrity of your model in terms of calculations and filters. So I think really know what you're doing if you're going to do many-to-many, but also it comes with a big health warning.
Yeah, it does come with a health warning. It's sort of like it does, and it literally has a warning message that that appears, and it says, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I think if you're testing something out, that's what you can find often. Actually, some of the missing pieces, right? If you put both those fields into the same table, but the problem is that's not a very good modeling practice to start with. Is to have we've got two columns at the same labels. We want to have a single label so we know where the holes are. And so I think the many-to-many can kind of help diagnose some of the problems, but then I think you want to figure out a way to work around it, so you don't end up with a question that you have to go and figure out what's going on later. And the other thing is, if you have many-to-many and there's other tables, then often the tables weren't joined. So if you have that kind of the star schema, then the tables don't kind of get confused with each other.
Yeah, look, I mean, go into Power Query and just go and build some join tables based on that data. Just make sure you've got your one-to-manys. You can use that for filtering. There's some pretty well documented modeling techniques to getting around it. But I agree, when people get into a bit of a mess, we see things like this very regularly.
It's an art and a science, they say.
It is. It is.
And it's actually there's documentation that talks about that. They say it's an art and a science. There's rules, and then there's also occasions when you may break the rules too. And you may have a situation where you want to do something different. And so, it is that working on it incrementally.
Yeah, I agree.
And the tables themselves, it's easy to kind of, when it joins them together, oftentimes they're kind of jumbled on the page, sort of like a spaghetti. And that makes it kind of hard to tell like which keys are which. So in one of the best practices that, I learned about years ago, and I always try to use this, is this idea of the layers, and having, the top dimension at the top, and then some of them may join to other tables, but it's a lot easier to see it when you can see it sort of like this tree, as opposed to, trying to track where having this maze of tables and then the lines that go between them, and they're not even necessarily in a straight line. Some of them is, you can see go around other tables, which is not particularly ideal, especially if someone else picks up your model. If you can use a spaghetti, the spaghetti star schema, but then, often you'll probably be called all the time to ask what's going on.
Yeah, and I'm back to Todd's point actually about documentation. I've worked with people that will, append fact or dim to table names when they're working on them, so you can go and visually pick them out very quickly in terms of what they are. And I think layout is absolutely important, so it's clear for anybody that goes and follows your work what you're doing and what you've done.
Yeah, and I think there's you look at a lot of it and you think, well, at least, what I've seen, I'm always looking for a better way to do something. And sometimes if that means looking at the way I did something before and realizing I can do it in a better way, I really try to embrace that.
Yeah, and I think when the modeling view in Power BI, of course, you've got the ability to go and add tabs. So what you can do, if you got one of these views could have, I don't know, 40, 50 tables in, for example, and even on my nice big 32-inch screen in front of me, that's still tough to go and navigate around. And I think, the tabs are great in the modeling view within Power BI, in that you can just go and focus on an area, organize the tables in that area, organize the join to make sure you join to the correct fields. And I think it's a convenient way of working.
Yeah, and it definitely is also kind of a sanity. It's a way to keep sane in a lot of it too, is that documentation, organization, and a lot of it is talked about like, oh, it's for other people. A lot of it ends up being for ourselves as well.
Oh yeah. Don't forget documentation for yourself. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're not looked at something for a reasonable amount of time, and you've been working on all kinds of other stuff, the chances are you will forget what you did.
Yeah, and it could be as soon as the next week, and so it really is. It's not like extensive. I think sometimes it could just be notes, right, to start with, saying, okay, this is what what I put together, and here's sometimes, and they say that you retain like a lot of knowledge by explaining how something works to other people. So what my approach is for modeling and for documentation is to often take like screenshots, right? If I can comment in a SQL query, like if there's something specific that I need to find, I try not to comment too much, because then I think it makes it longer and harder to read. But I try to kind of add comments about key things, because then, when you do go back, it's those key things that you're going to get stuck with.
Yeah. So Helen, Steve Lyle has asked, and I'm guessing it's in relation to the slide we're looking at right now. What's the best practice?
So I put the data tables at the bottom, and then what I do is I put essentially the keys that they tie to above that. And sometimes one example of this is I've done modeling with date time, with some of it where you have, let's say that we have the total for, we're looking at like weather compared to actually electricity, for example. and the electricity is measured hourly, and then the weather's measured daily. So the dimensions they're compared against, they may not necessarily be the same. And so in that case, what I do is I would take that fact table, so there's one that stores the data, and for the electricity, and I would tie that to, and I would connect that to the date time. And then the weather, you would essentially have skip that, the hourly measurements, and instead you would have something that is, on a daily rate, but you would want to connect. You'd want to connect those dates together, kind of at the top. So you would have, the weather would have kind of a line going through that layer, and it would connect to the date at the top, and then the date time would connect to the date, so that if you wanted to look at the date, you would have that option. So it's kind of connecting it really, so it all connects to, to the, you don't have any kind of isolated islands, and rather, if you want to summarize something, think about like what that key field is you're drawing. In this case, it would be like the dates.
Yeah. So think the diagram on the left rather than the right in general.
Yeah. So you want to go the organized one. So the spaghetti is an awesome food, but it definitely doesn't make us, definitely can create issues with the schemas. And, I think also if you create something like this, what ultimately happens is you get stuck with managing it, because if other people can't figure out what's going on, then you're kind of going to be doing the same work, maybe doing the same work forever, because, you're the knowledge, the gatekeeper for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Good points. I've just got a question from Matthew Seltzer. How did my progress of learning DAX evolve? Oh God, that's a really good question. And I'm going to ask that one back at you, Helen, as well.
We both have our own stories for this, I'm sure.
Yeah, and I'll be brief. So we've only got 20 minutes in total. But for me, so my background is ERP and CRM applications. So in terms of, I work for Microsoft and SAP, and spent some time implementing both and working on them, and reporting always being a part of it. And was working with a bespoke sales order and logistics processing application here in Houston, and the reporting wasn't working particularly well, so we decided to take a look at Power BI. So Matthew, the question was really out of necessity, and I just had to go and pick it up. And how to get proficient? I think if you're using it very regularly, then you're probably looking around 6 months, I think, 6 months plus to get proficient. Try and do lots of different things if possible. I think, I was in the good fortune whereby I was working with lots of different data types and, lots of problems that need to be solved. Forums are great for that when people have got issues to go and have to apply that knowledge, but it can take some time. Helen, what about you?
So I would say DAX, I found DAX was, the learning curve was pretty steep to pick up, because it wasn't similar. It looks deceivingly, the syntax is pretty straightforward. It looks a lot like Excel. And I think it's, even people that are, really good at DAX, it's something that the logic of it takes a bit of time to pick up. And once the approach that I found really helpful was to think in terms of filter first and then perform the calculation on that filtered data. So I had to get to the point where I filtered it down to a specific date range. Sometimes it was a specific, value in the table, because it doesn't actually work on cells. It works on rows, and it works on columns and tables. And so that took, that sometimes that takes a bit of getting used to, because Excel is very flexible, and can be a great thing. And that can also sometimes mean that, we can change one cell to make it work. And so it was something that once I figured out that it was like filter, then do the calculations on that. And I would say it probably took about 6 months to really pick up on it and to feel, like I could, really get a foothold on that. And what I think about is like the calculate is kind of the bread and butter of DAX. And so if started using that, ended up being, kind of a DAX function I use probably 75% of the time.
Yeah, so a quick question from Steve Lyles. So what tool was this diagram built in, and does the tool re-scramble the diagram every time you open it? So I'll answer very quickly, Helen. So this is built in Power BI Desktop, which is a free download. So you can do everything we're looking at here within Power BI Desktop. You can actually do an awful lot free of charge in Power BI Desktop. And no, Power BI Desktop will keep the tables wherever you leave them. So, Helen, in terms of putting these visuals together, has gone to the conscious effort of putting together a neat one and a not so neat one.
Yeah, one of the challenges, and I'm curious to see what the updates for this are. Like if you download so if you're using a shared shared Power BI service like Power BI Pro or Premium, is if you download the PBIX file from the cloud service, it will re-scramble the tables. But if I have this saved to my desktop, and I open it again, thankfully it stays in the same format.
Yeah.
And so this is a table this is a graphic I put together. It was part of a LinkedIn post. There's really kind of three things three structures we can create with DAX. And so it's interesting because a lot of people, especially people that are active in terms of like the Power BI community, a lot of them start with analysis services. And in that case, that was that you would write the query to, you could use DAX to query the analysis services databases. In that case, the tables are all connected. And so I ended up learning, columns is very similar to Excel, but we really want to use kind of measures. And that's why there's sort of the magic dust around it. And it's also, so then I kind of ended up using, learning about tables later. And then there is a use for columns too, right? If you're writing a query, then you would create a column. But typically in Power BI, you want to keep your model small. And so adding a column takes up a lot more space than a measure. And so a measure is really this portable formula. It's a portable calculation that you can move between tables. The tough thing is that the measures themselves, is that the result that we see returned depends on the context in which we're calculating it in. So if a lot of times I'll set up a pivot table, right? So a table visual in Power BI, and then I will create the calculations in DAX like step by step to see how they work, because you can see the filters, they say the dates. And then calculate on that. And then if you're adding it to another table, the results can change. So it's kind of like a supercharged, they're supercharged pivot tables, right? And it grew initially from when Power Pivot was developed, and they've focused a lot more on Power BI in the last few years. And so the result we see returned depends on the context in which we're calculating, so the table in which we're adding it to.
Yeah. One thing, Helen, so I'm just looking at, I'm going time police is part of my role here. So we've got a smidge over 10 minutes left. So Steve has asked a question about, it's a good one actually. What do you get from DAX that you don't get from SQL in terms of scripting and language?
I think it's really neat how the date calculations work in DAX. I think that, and actually Power Query has some great date formulas. There's a lot of I think DAX can be fun to work with. Like, so I've done like loan calculations with DAX, where the other thing is that DAX lets us kind of dynamically select the inputs. And so we can create a parameter in DAX, and then we can feed that parameter value into a calculation. We can update it dynamically, whereas SQL, you get a table output, right? And for the most, right, that's the values in the columns, they're going to stay the same, whereas DAX is dynamic. And so if it's something you want to have change, like let's say a percentage change metric, that's something that DAX is particularly good at, is having a calculation that's dynamic. Whereas if it's something that's almost like fixed in reports, that's where SQL comes in. And there's a really great diagram that shows that if this was in someone's blog post, was that the overlap between SSRS and Power BI, and that SSRS is this kind of inline SQL, and looking at if you want to have a report that's going to be fixed, whereas I think Power BI is a lot more dynamic. And so but you don't want to be like cleaning data often in DAX, because that can take up a lot of time. And what I found was that with DAX performance was that it would be doing really well, and then all of a sudden you might add a calculation, all of a sudden it slows down. And so there's kind of a jump in that. And so you can use there's performance analyzer tools you can use, and you would use it like on a specific visual. So you'd want to create a table and then kind of interact with visual, and then you can look at the snippet of the DAX code, because DAX actually works with the visuals. When it renders them, it figures out what's going to be shown. So it queries the data, which is ideally cached in the import.
Yeah, and speed is an important thing. And Iban, and I apologize if I pronounced that incorrectly, has asked a question about tips for optimizing slow Power BI reports. There's a great Guy in a Cube video with Patrick LeBlanc on YouTube, which talks about 3 ugly babies. And I'm sure you've seen it, Helen, given you're laughing. But yeah, I mean, that Iban, if you go and have a look, Guy in a Cube on YouTube, three ugly babies. Patrick LeBlanc does a great job of answering that question about dealing with 3 factors about dealing with slow reports. It will generally be in your it's either data set size, data set amount, or probably just something to do with the calculations would be my guess.
Yeah. If you have a lot of filters on it, sometimes that can be problematic. So if you're doing filters in DAX calculations, what can happen is if it takes too long, because every time you add a filter, it slows it down. And so if it's filtering, then that's going to be and it's based on kind of how it's aggregated too. So summary table is going to aggregate a lot faster. And also the other thing is that SQL uses like numeric joins, and those work faster because it's easier to match numbers than it is to match text values especially for large data sets.
Yeah.
Small data sets, you can get away with a lot.
Yeah, you can. Just very quickly, so Jim and Ian said we're okay to go. Well, if it's okay with the audience, we're okay to go over time instead in terms of doing a bit of Q&A. So just as less time pressure if people want to hang around, and we can answer any questions then.
Yeah,
sorry, Helen, back to you.
Diagram too. So this is an example of the this uses variables, and so there's I've used this time, and I like using dates because you can see them on this familiar time series axis. And so I look at really how to start it at a particular date, and then what we're expanding it over. And so really we're trying to figure out, before we do any of the calculations in DAX, in this case, we're trying to figure out we're looking at the rate on the previous date, but we have to figure out what that date is. So we do essentially all these steps for filtering before we can really aggregate it, and using, in this case, an average DAX function.
Yeah, look, and date calculations are tough anywhere, aren't they? The best of times.
Yeah.
So, but what do you think makes date calculations easier in Power BI? I think you mentioned that as a difference with SQL.
There's more there's more date functions directly built in. So in this case, so in this example, I've used the last date, which will take our filtered data set and it will determine where that last date occurs. And then we can calculate the dates between, and you can set the dates between based on, you could make it a day, you could make it a month. And so there's various levels of time. And so those are, and I'm comparing this to Excel in particular, because I think Excel is, very ubiquitous with a lot of reporting and calculations, in that someone may take the data and ultimately put it in Excel and do more calculations. And we can use DAX for a lot of those calculations. It's just a matter of how to get the filters appropriately set up. So in this case, essentially, I think of it like a ruler, and we can either take the DAX filters and we can move it if we start at one point, for example, and this is put yourself literally standing on a pivot table, and that you're looking at, okay, what position am I in right now? Because that's how the measure calculates. And so we want to change the context by either moving to a different date in this case, or we want to expand the date range and then do a calculation over that expanded date range. And so that goes kind of back to what I'd displayed in the previous slide. And this was a topic on a LinkedIn post, was that works like a ruler, where you're either moving it or you're expanding it. And I thought that that was really helpful to me to understand how DAX works, was looking at these filter options. I think that dates are actually a great way to learn DAX, because you know what you're trying to filter for, and then what you want to make sure you have the right filter, and then calculate over that. So there's a lot of there's a lot of DAX functions specifically for dates, and here's a few examples of them.
Yeah, Helen, I'm just looking at time, and I've just been communicating with Jim, and what I'm going to suggest is that we hand over to Jim to go and wrap things up. But we are happy to hang around if there's any more questions that Ian can funnel them, and we can do a Q&A after Jim has done his wrap up. So, Helen, that good with you?
Yeah.
All right, Jim,
thank you
over
all
to you,
for
sir.
attending.
Yeah, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Andy and Helen. That was awesome. Like Andy said, first thing we're going to do is get me out of the way here, and then in the chat window, go ahead and start throwing your questions in now, and they'll pick up on those once I finish. Just a few things. A reminder: the event survey. You have a chance to win $100. The survey link is in the live chat window as well. But here's the survey link. Excuse me. Make sure you finish that by the end of the day Friday to be eligible to win that $100. So what the heck? Can't go wrong. It's only 12 questions. Our next upcoming Code Presents webinar will be making VS Code, Visual Studio Code, your own. It's to be presented by John Peterson, and that's going to be on Wednesday, April 13th. So we look forward to see you there. Also remind you that you have a free subscription to Code Magazine coming. Just as being a registered attendee, you're going to automatically get that. You'll see an email for that. Again, there's a subscription link here you can share with your friends on social media, your enemies, your frenemies. Anybody you want to share that link with, please feel free. And a reminder, we are looking for developers. So if you're looking for a new gig, we've got openings for a number of different positions. They're all listed here. That bit.ly will also take you there, and all those bit.ly links are also in the chat window. Reminder that the free ticket for some free consulting is available for you guys. It's 1 hour on us. I mean, just let me know when you want to get that scheduled. There's no strings, no commitment. We're not going to charge you for anything. It's just help from our team. If you've got a question, you're stuck on something, we'll jump on a call for an hour and help you. Heck, it could be a half hour, whatever it is. If you need some help, just let us know. The Code mobile app, great way to consume the Code Magazine content while you're on the go. And then what some people don't realize is that as a Visual Studio subscriptions customer or as a Dev Essentials subscriber, you're also entitled to a free Code Magazine subscription. So you can either take advantage of it there or through our offer. And with that's it. We can go ahead and open up the Q&A session that Helen and Andy can take care of that. I just want to thank you all for attending, and I will turn it over to the chat window and or the live portion of this where Helen and Andy can keep answering questions. So thanks for attending, everybody, and Andy and Helen, back to you.
Hello, everybody. So if there are any questions, please put them in the chat window now. And Ian said there's nothing there, so maybe everybody is using their time effectively and getting off to the next meeting or event.
Or they're figuring out the question to ask in Power BI.
Yeah, yeah.
It actually takes, I think there's a lot of skill, there's, the skill to learning how to Google the question that you need to answer.
Yeah, that's, look, and it's definitely, it's interesting with Power BI, isn't it? Because it's getting better over time, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
As more people are asking questions, there's a greater body of knowledge out there that, you can easily go and Google and find stuff out. I mean, I've been working on, to extend this to Power Platform, Power Automate, and, just 6 months ago or even a year ago, then, I would get very stuck and there wasn't a lot out there, and there seems to be much more at the moment, and I managed to sail through the things I needed to get done. So yeah, look, it's great that people go out and ask questions and people go and answer them, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. So Ian, I'm just looking to you to see if anything is coming up in terms of questions. If not, we can, nothing yet. So, all right, well, look, if there's nothing yet there, then I would like to thank you, everybody, for listening in, and thank you for your time, Helen.
Thank you, and thank you, Andy, for hosting. You're an amazing host of webinars and podcasts. So follow Andy on LinkedIn, and you can see more of that Dunning-Kruger diagram transformed to something relatable. Yeah.
Whatever I need to go and rant about. All right, look, Helen, you're very kind. Thank you. I appreciate that. All right, well, look, from me, thank you, and I hope you enjoyed that, and goodbye.
Thank you.